Thank you very much, Jacinta. Let's meet the first panel, and it's a good one. Whole Melbourne team as well. We've got Senator James Paterson joining us and making his Sky News debut, Fairfax columnist turned comic, Lawrence Money. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
That is a fairly unusual career trajectory, isn't it? To go from a veteran columnist to...
Well, it was a humorous column a lot of the time.
It was.
I look back 50, 60 years to school where my last report said Lawrence should do well as once he realises life's more serious than he thought. Didn't quite work out that way.
How are you enjoying the transition to comedy?
Well, I had a successful season at the Comedy Festival, 13 shows, and as I was saying to James, I made enough. I built my Fairfax wing with the redundancy money from the Age, and now I'm landscaping the backyard with my Comedy Festival
Fantastic.
revenue.
And you're taking the show on the road?
Hope to go to Murchison, to Charlton and to Witcherproof. You know why I want to go to Witcherproof?
Oh, I have no idea why.
Because the hall is in a street called Broadway. And from then on, I can say I've been on Broadway, right? Yeah.
You opened on Broadway. You can't beat that. Now, let's start with the issue that has dominated the news week. The man himself, Israel Folau, was on Sky News last night in his first televised interview, and Rugby Australia has already come out today and denied some of what Israel alleged last night. Let's have a look at the bit that's in contention.
Did you ever agree with Rugby Australia to not send the tweet in question?
No, I didn't.
Did they ask you to remove it?
Yes.
Did they offer you money if you removed it?
Yes.
And you said?
I said no. I couldn't do that. As a person that's convicted by my faith, I couldn't live with that.
Lawrence, who do we believe? Israel Folau or Rugby Australia?
Well,
they say they never offered him money to remove it.
The point here, Rita, if he is not telling the truth, that's a lie, and liars, according to his tweet, go to hell. So I think that's going to be a little...
Well, that's it. And I have heard that a bit today, James, saying that this is a man who's sacrificed his career for his beliefs. Is he likely to lie? But what do you feel about this entire issue? Because the coalition has been criticised for being a little bit weak on it. There's been a number of ALP MPs who have come out and spoken in defence of Folau. We've even had Gillian Triggs, which shocked everybody.
The Queen of 18C.
Yes. Suddenly she loves free speech, so we're all for that. But until today, when Scott Morrison made some comments, it's been seen by some that the coalition has been a little bit weak on this issue.
Look, I think that's a bit unfair. Myself and half a dozen of my colleagues at least have been on the record extensively on this issue for weeks now, stating our deep concern at the behaviour of Rugby Australia and our sympathy for those who are concerned about the freedom of speech and freedom of religion implications of the case. I think one of the most remarkable things from the week, Rita, is how spectacularly the attacks on him and his family have backfired. I mean, the outpouring of support through the Australian Christian Lobby for Israel Folau and his wife Maria and their family, in terms of $2 million raised from tens of thousands of donors, I've never seen anything like it in Australian politics and Australian political activism. That is a lot of Australians standing up saying they're very concerned about this trend.
Absolutely. They raised in such quick time just over 700,000, and then GoFundMe shut that page. Again, people just saw that as so unfair, given that they allow people who are charged with criminal offences to fundraise on that site. And then when Australian Christian Lobby opened a site, I thought, oh, this isn't ever going to work. I had a look at it. You had to put in so much detail, not only your credit card details to process the payment, but all sorts of emails and addresses and phone numbers. I thought, this is never going to work. And people don't like putting in this much detail and having such a cumbersome process. And yet, less than 2 days, 2.2 million, until they halted themselves the fundraising. So, Lawrence, I've got to say, I knew there was a great deal of support for Israel, but I was surprised that people were willing to put their hard-earned where their feelings were.
Well, on my Twitter feed, nothing like your vast audience, but I did suggest right at the start the churches should get together and create a fund themselves. While I was reading about that, I was amazed to read that GoFundMe, I suppose they have to because of business, they take 2.2% of all the donations.
Plus, they seek extra donations. So whenever you go to donate via GoFundMe, they encourage you to give them an extra percent.
To them, not the cause.
To them, so they can keep going.
Yeah, so it was never made clear. Did they give back the 2.2%?
Yeah, I think they did. I think they would not be able to
and is
cope
the
with
Christian lobby taking any cream off the top?
No,
So there you
they've
go.
said
He's
that...
well ahead.
Well ahead.
2% of 2 million, it's not bad, is it?
Well, that's what James said. Every time that people came out, whether it was former netballers, whether it's the dude who dresses like a pirate, whether it was the ANZ, every time someone came out and gave them a whack, it was an own goal. The public sympathy just increased
It's
for
the
them.
exploding cigar theory.
Absolutely, and I think the going after his wife, James, I think that is something that just rubbed a lot of people up the wrong way. And I saw people who weren't previously that engaged in this story suddenly become interested.
Well, that touched a real raw nerve, I think, for a lot of Australians because, I mean, are we seriously saying in the 21st century that a wife must distance herself or denounce her husband in order to keep her own employment, that she must demonstrate that she doesn't share her husband's views and thinks he's a horrible bigot in order to continue to play sport or be employed? That was really appalling behaviour by those sponsors in particular that said, of course, we're not seeking to put pressure on Netball Australia or anyone else, but at the same time raising their concerns and putting them on the record. I just thought that was a real misjudgment.
Oh, huge misjudgment. You've got to wonder about the judgment of the people in these senior positions at ANZ and the health fund, I think they're called.
Should be
HCF,
pointed out too that
why they would think this would be a popular move. This would paint them in a good light with their
continually
customers.
amazed at their stupidity. But it should be pointed out that Maria, all she did was point to the funding. She wasn't pointing to the tweet.
No, she just
point of all this
put a link to
was
the
link to
GoFundMe page.
The GoFundMe.
That was it.
And that's
no
enough.
Commentary, no statements, no stance.
This is the atavistic sort of action plan of these people now. You destroy the person you're after, you destroy their family, you destroy the business, you go after
Anyone
sponsors,
associated with them.
advertising, anything. It's like a nuclear bomb, destroy everything in its path.
That's a really good point, Lawrence. And I thought what was interesting after GoFundMe said you can't fundraise through our platform and he had to seek an alternative route and be supported by the Australian Christian Lobby, complaints were then made to the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profits Commission to go after the ACL. Yeah. So it's very clear that there is a group of Australians who are out there who believe that not only should Israel Folau be fired, but he shouldn't have the capacity to defend himself at all. He shouldn't be able to do it through GoFundMe, who they complain to. He shouldn't be able to do it through the Australian Christian Lobby. He must be shut down and prevented from even mounting a defence for himself, from even being heard.
Unless he bankrupts himself. And again, these ridiculous objections, but he's wealthy. Well, good on him, he's wealthy. Why should he have to... He's already sacrificed his income. Why should he have to sacrifice all his assets he's built up
and the point
to
is,
fight this fight?
The public has given $2 million knowing he's wealthy.
Yeah.
Right.
So, I mean,
No one's been fooled.
Exactly.
And he's not out there saying, I'm starving, give me money. Yeah. Now, meanwhile, we've had another fundraiser to counter Israel's. This is Matt Zhubansky launching a rival campaign to raise funds for sick kids and an LGBTI charity. Zhubansky said that what we're trying to do is get out of this toxic discourse around everything and show that there's a different way to be a person of faith. Well, I've got to say, Lawrence, this made a lot of people feel uncomfortable because it's almost cynically using sick children to...
But why is it
give it to Israel? I mean, as if you donate to Israel, you don't care about kids with cancer, or...
But why is it called a rival fund? You know, set up a fund by all means. It's a wonderful, causes she's... But it's nothing to do with Israel Folau.
But it is. That's the whole way it's been promoted.
Well, she is saying it is, but I can't see any relationship whatsoever. It's a different subject.
Yeah, I just think that was, again... you could start that fund without having any sort of commentary about Israel Folau.
By the way, with Gillian Triggs, you should point out that she was only really supporting Maria, not Israel.
I don't know, she supported Israel.
No, you read into it. There's not that much about Israel. It all goes on into it about women's rights, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. So it's the old feminist stuff, and Israel is a sort of aside.
Okay,
that's my reading.
You know what? I still... it's a week where I found myself in agreement with Penny Wong and Gillian Triggs, so I don't know what I'm doing. So that is...
Something's going...
but yeah, she came out and made some strong comments. Now, this week we've also saw the long-awaited Bad Blood, New Blood special, which featured Senator James Paterson. Let's have a look.
Oh.
It was probably really only on the Friday that colleagues, as far as I'm aware anyway, started actively discussing leadership as an issue and Peter as an alternative candidate.
It was interesting. You also made the point there that, throughout this entire saga and the election campaign and the Turnbull camp's behaviour during that campaign, that some people within the Liberal Party came to understand why Malcolm had to be rolled.
Well, I think, Rita, it's more that the public's had an insight into what the party's dealing with. I mean, I've kind of made the comments I made in the documentary because I think I've got a duty to history to make sure that those events are understood from every perspective of those who participated in it, as I did. But yeah, I think the only thing I'd draw people's attention to, and there are further revelations yesterday and today, is that that's what many in the party have been dealing with for a long time.
Yes, and I don't think Malcolm would have enjoyed watching that documentary.
I haven't seen it yet.
You have to watch it. You have to.
I was intrigued reading this morning that he had the Prime Ministerial chauffeured limousine on standby, ready to go to Yarralumla, a la Whitlam and Fraser. But yeah, that's a bit dramatic.
Well, let's talk about that. The Australian reports today that the Attorney-General, Christian Porter, feared he was facing a constitutional crisis as Malcolm Turnbull threatened to go to an early election to I don't know what his planning was. It was going against his own party almost. And we also learned this week that Turnbull's desperate attempt to hold on to power saw him trying to persuade the Governor-General, Peter Cosgrove, not to commission Peter Dutton as Prime Minister, and that led to a clash with the Attorney-General. And to give the Attorney-General all credit, it seems that he stood up to Turnbull, which is no easy task, given the bluster and the fact that it's the Prime Minister you're dealing with.
Well, Christian Porter is a person of great integrity and judgment, and that's best demonstrated in times of crisis and times of difficulty when the pressure really comes on. And I think he really demonstrated that week. He stood up and shone and conducted himself in a very appropriate way for an Attorney-General to do so. And history might have been different if he did not.
Absolutely. That is a scary thought, that if a weaker man was in that role, what could have transpired.
Was Malcolm's son tweeting during this episode?
Oh, I don't know. He's blocked me, shattered.
Lucky you.
I don't know why, because I've been so complimentary. Now, talking about courage and Christian Porter, he's actually fulfilled an election promise and gone out and got a tattoo. Looks like quite a sizable tattoo somewhere on his torso. Let's have a look at it. He said that if he won his seat and increased his majority, that a tattoo would be forthcoming, and he's followed through. Do we not have an image of the tattoo, people? We need images with these. Here we go.
Here we go.
It's not bad. Was that something you would consider doing, James?
Rita, never let it be said that politicians don't keep their promises. This was actually a painful promise to keep, and he kept it. So full credit.
Insignia, isn't it?
I thought he would go for something subtle and small and, on the ankle or the wrist maybe, but he's gone a very serious tattoo indeed.
That's it, and he's showing a bit of skin there as well. It's almost a risque photo. With that, I'm going to go to a break. We've got plenty more to coming up next. Thanks for watching The Friday Show. I'm Rita Panahi, and I'm joined by Senator James Paterson and Lawrence Money. Gentlemen, let's talk about energy. And the Herald Sun had a report this week, front page story, on one of Victoria's biggest coal-fired power stations closing down early because of the Victorian government's radical go-it-alone bid to slash carbon emissions. The Yallourn Power Station provides around 22% of Victoria's electricity, but the Victorian government has a target of having 50% renewables, and that is bad news for Yallourn. Of course, we saw the closure of the Hazelwood plant back in 2017. And, James, that came about after the Victorian government tripled the tax on brown coal. If you make it a very hostile environment for businesses, then it's not surprising that they close up shop and leave.
That's right, Rita. The Victorian government is sending a very, very clear signal to the market. We do not want traditional baseload sources of energy. We lost 25% of our power generation with Hazelwood. We'll lose 22% with Yallourn. So in the space of a couple of years, we're potentially losing 50% of our power generation in Victoria. When we lost Hazelwood, the wholesale price of energy almost doubled in Victoria.
We were told it was going to rise very, very, very
3% was the
small,
prediction.
so much that you would hardly notice it, and we were not going to have reliability affordability issues. But Lawrence, earlier this year, Victoria had 200,000 homes and businesses blacked out on one of the hottest days of the year.
My wife and I stayed up just before Hazelwood shut, and the B&B we're staying in, one of the employees from Hazelwood was running it, the B&B, and he said to me, they're talking about 5%, we say 50% rise in price. Within about 2 years, he was bang on.
Yeah.
You know, it's unbelievable. The policy seems in Victoria, all we hear about is shutting things down. Hang on, but what about, you know, sustaining and improving the electricity we've got? I found a quote from the Greens fellow, an acting spokesperson on climate change, Tim Reid, who said is very enamoured by the solar homes package that's going to put 700,000 Victorian homes, solar panels on their roof within 10 years. So for getting rid of 22% of power, it's going to be apparently replaced by 700,000.
Well, you know what, that would be fantastic if
what happens in a cloudy day?
Well, that's it. That's the baseload power is the problem, isn't it? Because the Victorian government does have this planned taxpayer-funded solar panels across the board, which I don't have an issue with necessarily, but that doesn't mean that you're going to have power when you need it. If you've got a cold day and you've got everyone turning on their heaters, then where's that power coming from?
That's right, Rita, and often with the case of solar panels, particularly rooftop solar on people's homes, is it generates the energy when it's in lowest demand, and when the highest demand comes on, it's not generating it, because often the peak demand in a country like Australia is when people come home from work and they turn on the dishwasher and they turn on the TV and they turn on the oven and all the rest. So that's when you need it, and often that's not when solar panels are delivering it. So unless we solve the storage problem, and we're a long way from being able to do that, then we're going to run into serious problems in Victoria.
Well, what can the federal government do in this area to help Victorians out? Because our state government, and they're not alone, there are other state governments in this country who are hell-bent on these very bold emission target reductions, these very bold renewable targets, and the consumers are paying a price for that. Can the federal government do anything? Can you encourage them to at least, give some sort of a compensation to households?
Well, our very strong view is that emissions reduction policy is the responsibility of the federal government, not the responsibility of the state government, and it does Australia no good to have them all running out off in different directions doing their own thing. We think the target that we've got is responsible and achievable. It's actually, in per capita terms, one of the most ambitious in the world, and unlike many other countries, will achieve it, unlike most of Europe, who won't come anywhere near close to achieving the targets that they've promised. So I don't know why Victoria feels the need to run so far ahead of the rest of the country and subject us to this expensive and unreliable power system.
Okay, now if we're saying that it's unwise for Victoria to have these sort of targets, doesn't it also translate that it's unwise for the federal government to have it? You know, aren't we all paying more than we should for energy because we have signed up to these reductions in emission targets, and our targets are quite high by international standards? Well,
Australia's track record in this area is actually very strong. Every time we've set a target, we've achieved it without too great a cost to our economy. Certainly there is a cost, and I wouldn't want to pretend otherwise. But we've set targets that we can achieve, and I think that's the responsible thing to do. We couldn't walk away from the global community with no target at all. It wouldn't be credible for a country like Australia, but we should set targets that are achievable and realistic, and that's what this government's done.
Okay, now this worrying news from Victoria comes as we learn that there are Victorians dying of hypothermia. This is just insane for a first world country. A study published in the Internal Medicine Journal and conducted by doctors at the Alfred and researchers from Monash University found that across just 2 inner city emergency departments, more than 200 patients presented with hypothermia, 23 of them dying, over a 7-year period to 2016. Now, about 80% of these patients were found indoors. So these are people who are becoming hypothermic in their own homes, Lawrence. Can you believe this?
It's a disgrace. It shouldn't be like that, isn't it? First world country. I mean, we saw talking about subsidies and radical targets. South Australia is an obvious example of that. You know, they basically went broke trying to achieve these ridiculous pulling down power stations. They had the big blackout. I can't see why, not being I'm not a climate... I'm a climate denier, not a denier, sort of negative, but I don't believe in the...
You don't think the world's going to end in 12 years?
Of course it's not, and I don't think what we're doing is going to make an iota of difference to the climate anyway. But, and I'm surprised that the new government is still pursuing that. But, you know, to have people dying or even sick or shivering under blankets is a disgrace.
James,
Absolute disgrace.
I would love to know, well, frankly, I'd be a little bit scared to know, but I would be interested to know what that figure would be if this study was done across all emergency departments in the country, because this figure of the 217 that they found, that was only 2 emergency departments in fairly affluent areas of Melbourne. Now, if you did this throughout the country, and it'd be frightening to see how many people are suffering from hypothermia, passing away, because energy prices are preventing them from properly heating their homes in winter.
It's incredibly disturbing and sobering statistics, Rita, and it's not like Australia is a uniquely cold country. We have a pretty temperate climate, so it's not like we're in far northern Europe that freezes for half the year. So it is very sobering and disturbing.
Absolutely. And we had some figures released earlier this year from the Australian Energy Market Operator, and it showed that for low-income households in Victoria, where prices have gone up, they're spending up to $1 out of every 7 of their disposable income on energy. So you can understand why they're turning off the heater when they should not be, even to the detriment of their own health.
The irony is, of course, the climate change propaganda that it's all global, what used to be called global warming, but then didn't warm. People aren't dying of warming, they're dying of cold.
Yeah.
Right? So
Well, the same phenomenon
other end of
is...
the temperature.
That's it's the global cooling crisis. But the same thing happens in summer. People are reluctant to turn on the air conditioners in the summer heat. Now, let's go to America, where today we saw the second of the Democratic presidential debates. Here's a highlight from the latest debate.
You also worked with them to oppose busing. And, there was a little girl in California who was part of the second class to integrate her public schools. And she was bused to school every day. And that little girl was me.
It's a mischaracterization of my position across the board. I did not praise racist. That is not true. Number one. Number two, if we want to have this campaign litigated on who supports civil rights and whether I did or not, I'm happy to do that.
Wowee, they're trying to paint Joe as a racist now. It's amazing. For 8 years, he was a hero standing next to Obama, but suddenly his past is all problematic. Both of the debates, I've got to say, though, were pretty underwhelming, except for the contribution of Tulsi Gabbard, who's a Hawaii politician who, according to the Drudge Instant poll, won in a landslide. But it was Beto O'Rourke who's answered some questions in Spanish, just unprompted, that raised a few eyebrows, even among his fellow candidate, Cory Booker. Have a look at this.
Necesitamos incluir cada persona en nuestra democracia. Cada votante necesitamos.
Oh, James, this is a big field. Who do you see as the front runner in the Democrats? I know it's a difficult question when you've got 20 people taking part in these debates over 2 days, but who do you see as giving Trump the most trouble?
Well, I was going to say, Rita, the front runner in the Democratic primary is Donald Trump, because he's the biggest winner out of these debates. It strikes me how much the Democratic Party has become, as some left-wing parties around the world have, Labor Party in Australia is not immune, completely obsessed with identity politics, whether it is race or it is gender or it is other characteristics about us that we can't change. They are completely obsessed with it, and it's just not what is concerned to the mainstream Americans, Australians, Europeans, anywhere in the world. And if they keep going down this path, they are the only ones who can guarantee that Donald Trump will be re-elected. They're doing a great job of that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you were on the fence and you watch these debates, I doubt they would have won you over.
On the wall would be a better
On the wall,
expression.
yeah, on the wall. That hasn't been built yet. Well, that could be his greatest hurdle to being re-elected, the fact that there is still no wall.
Well, it's not his fault that he's trying to build the wall. He's denied the finance to build the wall.
That's true, but they may still hold it against him. But talking about the leader of the free world, he met with our fearless leader and they shared a meal, and Scott Morrison even invited the president to come to Melbourne for the President's Cup. Of course, Donald Trump is a big golf fan. Interestingly, Trump said he knew Morrison was going to win.
I want to congratulate the Prime Minister on a tremendous victory. He had a fantastic victory, as you know. He didn't surprise me, but he surprised a lot of other people. See, I knew him So I said, he's going to do very well, and he did. He did. They called it an upset, but I don't call it an upset. You probably did. Your wife didn't call it an upset.
Well, he seems happy. He seems to be happy, genuinely happy to be in the company of the Prime Minister. What have you heard on the grapevine about what happened in that meeting? Can you tell us what they ate? I'm interested in that.
I can't tell you what they ate, Rita, but what it does seem very clear is that Scott Morrison has very quickly established a very strong rapport with Donald Trump and real recognition, and there's a real kindred spirit there. And I think that stands Australia in good stead, that Donald Trump respects our Prime Minister, takes him seriously, wants to take time out of the G20 to spend time with him and talk about issues of importance to both our countries. And it's just such a vital security and strategic relationship to us, an investment relationship, a trade relationship, that's a really good sign for Australia.
And do you believe the President that he knew Morrison was going to win despite all the polls and the predictions?
You reckon it might be fake news?
I don't know. I mean, he saw what happened with his own election, so he might be the one man who, other than Rowan Dean, who was sure it was going to happen.
Well, he wasn't on tape saying it, though. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I think Trump's doing a great job, and I'm a great Trump supporter. I constantly get into friction with other people about this, but...
There's no point fighting about Donald Trump because the Trump haters are beyond reason. He could cure cancer and they'd say, you know, he's putting doctors out of work. They will find some reason to hate him.
That's exactly that's from Bolter, Andrew Bolt, who said that about Tony Abbott. And
yeah,
exactly. It's a
well,
great
it was the
quote.
same. It was the same irrational hatred that defies logic.
Hatred. It's quite extraordinary, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And before the meeting, Trump sent out this tweet featuring Australian government posters warning migrants not to pay people smugglers to come here illegally. Trump said, these flyers depict Australia's policy on illegal immigration. Much can be learned. James, that's quite high praise from the President to say, look at Australia, look at what they've achieved. We can do the same in America. Obviously, they don't have the advantage of being an island nation. They've got porous borders, but you can control your borders. And we've seen Europe finally embrace those Australian ideals as well.
One of the funny things about that tweet, Rita, is the gnashing of teeth and the depression that set in on the Australian left on Twitter, that we were being promoted around the world for our tough border protection. Some of them would be even more depressed to know that those advertisements were in fact published under Kevin Rudd's Prime Ministership. Those were the advertisements that he authorised, Labor government authorised, not even the evil coalition.
That's also, I didn't think that either, because Tony Abbott did manage to, within less than a year, stop the boats and start emptying out the detention centres. And remember, Lawrence, all your colleagues at The Age, everybody said it's impossible, can't happen.
I was in a very awkward position being a Conservative on The Age. Because,
were you the only one? How was it on the newsroom
John
floor?
Spooner was there. And
so the two of you?
Yeah, and that's about it. I think individually, loved all of them, lovely people. But I spent most of my, my 50 years in newspapers surrounded by left-wing people. Journalists tend to be left-wing.
Oh, of course, and across the board. But at The Age, they're particularly left-wing.
Yeah, well, I won't specify my old paper, but what's happening now generally across the world is that the left-wing sentiment is getting into the report and the news pages, and it's not particularly as the outline of the story. It's what story you choose, and what story you don't choose.
Yeah.
Now, as a columnist, it didn't worry me what I was saying to James before we came on. As a columnist, I was abused in 3 Houses of Parliament, Senate, House of Reps, and the Legislative Assembly. I was very annoyed Legislative Council didn't get into me, but that was 2 Labor and 1 Liberal. So I always wrote, what of the government of the day? You're a de facto opposition to make and you'll do the same thing, make their life a little uncomfortable. Sorry, James.
That's okay.
Oh, sorry, you're in government.
But there is, like you said, this blurring of the lines now. It's very well to express an opinion on the opinion pages, because that's what they are, they're an opinion. But we are now seeing, and with your former employer and certainly at the ABC and elsewhere, the lines blurred between news reporting and opinion, where there's this left-wing slant on the news reporting, particularly, you said, in the US, but increasingly in Australia. And I think all it does is destroy trust in the media.
Well, we've seen this with, the recent thing with GoFundMe. The quiet Australians, as ScoMo calls them, said, we've had enough of this. And they won't protest much, Conservative people, but give them a chance at a voting booth.
That's it.
bang.
That's
That's
it.
what
The
happens.
quiet Australians aren't, emoting on Twitter or taking to the street protesting. They get.
Well, they're probably happy with their lives. That's the thing.
Well, and they've
That's
got
right,
jobs.
exactly. They don't have time to do that. They've got,
They've got
kids
jobs
to raise, they've got
and-
jobs to do.
Exactly. Now, I've got to go to a quick break. We're going to be back with plenty more, including concerns about Angela Merkel's health. Thank you for watching The Friday Show. I'm joined by Senator James Paterson from the great state of Victoria and Lawrence Money, the veteran columnist turned comic. Now, James, we have to ask you about the Ministerial Code of Conduct and whether Christopher Pyne has breached it. Certainly, Penny Wong believes he has. She came out and said that he's using inside knowledge he has obtained as a minister in his role with EY, a company called EY. The Sydney Morning Herald reports that EY initially said the former Defence Minister would ramp up the firm's defence capability in South Australia, and he would help them lead conversations about what all states need to do to meet the challenges and opportunities this defence investment will bring. But the consulting firm later clarified that Mr Pyne would only deal with the private sector side of the business. But the optics of this, James, are terrible. How do you see it?
So the purpose of the Statement on Ministerial Standards is twofold. One is to make sure there are no conflicts of interest in dealing with your former colleagues, and that's an obligation both on a retiring minister who's taken up a job and existing ones, and I know they all understand their obligations. And the other purpose is to make sure that inside knowledge gained while in government can't be used for personal gain outside government. The simple act of taking a job doesn't necessarily violate that. It's how you conduct yourself in that job that's important. And I would expect and hope that an experienced senior politician like Christopher Pyne would be well across his obligations and will make sure that he...
He's working for a company in the defence sector, and he was a former defence minister. And surely that doesn't look great. Even if the...
As a wordsmith and as someone with my wife, not that. On Foxtel we watch Yes Minister, which is being replayed at the moment. And as a scholar of the language, I always look at the way they phrase these things. And I thought, when I saw the report about this, I noticed that the EY, that's the company, explained that Christopher Pyne is also here to help lead conversations, you see. So it's not actually being involved. It's leading a conversation.
Yeah.
What the hell does that mean? James, do you know what that means?
Well, they did clarify that later. They said, oh, no, he's going to be just focused on the private sector. He's not going to be looking at the government opportunities any longer. But I just think this is something where I see very little advantage, James, to current ministers or MPs coming out in defence of Christopher Pyne. I mean, surely this is his battle to fight, not the government's.
Well, we're being asked about it and we have to give honest answers, but I mean, there are ways for the Parliament to look into this if it has concerns. We have the Committee on Privileges, which has jurisdiction over matters like this, and if there is credible evidence and concrete evidence that the statement is not being adhered to, then they can look into that.
Okay. And what could be the penalty if he is found to have breached? Does he have to step down from the role, or...?
Well, there have been other cases in the past where, for example, the committee has, I know this will not sound very satisfying for you or your viewers, but condemned or censured former members of Parliament or existing members of Parliament. I can tell you, members of Parliament are very motivated to avoid that happening. It sounds like a wet lettuce, but it actually is a serious, reflection on your integrity and your personality, and that's not something most people want.
To censure someone as a former politician, that was a bit...
well, that's it. Once they're out of public life, there's not much you can do to them, is there? I mean, you can tarnish their reputation, perhaps, or their legacy, but there's really not much you can do as far as damaging them. They don't really care about the bad press.
They're gone. It's like the age saying, naughty boy to me. Who cares?
Exactly.
I'm not there anymore, you know.
Now, there are increasing concerns for German Chancellor Angela Merkel. I before called her Angela, and I was rebuked. But I say both are correct because it's Australia. But anyway, Angela Merkel, she was seen shaking uncontrollably during a meeting with the German president. It's the second such incident in just 2 weeks. However, her spokesman said that she has absolutely no health issues and she has already flown to Japan for the G20 summit and she's fine. But, Lawrence, does look worrying, doesn't it, when you see someone who's
Reminds
just
me-
visibly
reminds me-
shaking? You wonder if there's something seriously wrong.
Yeah, it reminds me of those Hillary Clinton shots, you know, before the president...
Well, you're not allowed to say that. You'll be
tottering
labelled a
along.
misogynist if you do that.
Well, too bad. No, she doesn't look well at all, and I'd be worried. I can't see how she can say there's no health issues. She's trembling like a leaf.
Well, the last time it happened, I think she was in a meeting with the Ukrainian leader, and she said she was badly dehydrated, so that's why she was shaking. So I don't know what the explanation will be this time. Now let's go to a disturbing story from UK, where I think this will trouble you whether you are pro-choice or pro-life. A British judge has ordered an abortion be performed on a mentally disabled woman who is 22 weeks pregnant, despite objections from the woman herself and her mother. Sky News UK reports that the woman's mother, who used to be a midwife, is opposed to the abortion and has said that she can take care of the child herself along with her daughter. But the judge has determined that it's in the best interest of the daughter to terminate the pregnancy. Now, I understand the case may be appealed and it may not be finalised, but James, this is pretty disturbing because who decides what's in the best interest of this mentally disabled woman who's in her 20s? She's not a child, but she is mentally disabled. The mother says, I can help raise this child. I want her to have it. The girl herself says, I don't want to have an abortion. And yet a judge has come in over the top and said, you're better off not having this baby.
Yeah, Rita, I think the state must exercise its power over its citizens in a very, very judicious way. And if it's going to order something as extreme as an abortion involuntarily, I mean, I can't even imagine what kind of threshold you would have to meet, but it would have to be such a high threshold that it's hard to imagine it being permissible in a free society. I think it's a disturbing case, but as I believe it is subject to appeal.
That's it. And especially given the lateness of the pregnancy. She's already at 22 weeks. And you're thinking about the psychological damage as well as all the other issues that she may suffer if she's forced into a procedure that she doesn't want to do.
It's curious that the mother and the mother's mother, both want the baby. So you wonder what brought it to court? Why was it in court? Why was the decision made that she should have an abortion?
Well, often there would be doctors who
perhaps,
intervene, who say, I mean, sometimes I very much agree with them. Say if a parent says, I don't want my child to have chemotherapy, even though it could save their life, and sometimes the doctors intervene and say, well, that's in the child's best
Unless
interest
there's a
to have
suspicion
it.
that her mental disablement is somehow inherited in the child. But I mean, I've always been against abortion. I think it's killing a living thing, you know, it's a living person.
Well, you know what? I'm pro-choice, but I like majority of certainly Americans that from recent polling, and I think the same would be true in Australia. I'm against late-term abortion, and I think this issue is got a lot more grey than some in the media give it credit for, because I think there's a lot of people who say, okay, abortion in the first trimester, if it's necessary, if that's what the woman wants, but late-term abortion, I think, is an entirely different.
Well, wasn't recently there a story about an abortion, baby being put down basically after it was born?
Well, there was a debate in the US, certainly with the Virginian
Postnatal
governor.
abortion.
They were talking about, post-birth abortion, which is just, again, you talk about the Democrats going to the loony fringes. There seems to be an argument that's being had in the Democrats. Why would you have that when the overwhelming bulk of the population is absolutely against any discussion like that? Now, thank you both for coming.
Pleasure.
Liberal Senator James Paterson and comic Lawrence Money. It feels weird saying that because everyone knows you as a columnist in this town. And I also say thank you and goodbye to our WIN viewers, but I'll be back with a new panel and another hour of news and views on Sky News Australia shortly.